Hello, everyone. I'm Beth. I'll be the chair for this session. I'd now like to welcome you here to this session on apocalyptic craft and to welcome our two speakers, Geraldine Hudson and Peter Gray. Geraldine Hudson is an interdisciplinary artist and curator. She participates at the intersections of sight, myth, psychological topography, otherness, and the liminal experience of the magical body. Drawing from initial psychogeographic work after her MA in 2006, where she was working with archetypes of the wild, sexuality and transgression in relation to carnival, ritual, place, and event, her practice has gradually evolved to acknowledge her own relationship to the esoteric as experiential research rather than anthropological study. She's also played an active role in various artive collectives, most recently the ecofeminist magical activist group NKK, who performed a number of rites, both publicly and privately, in various institutions in Stockholm. Geraldine, welcome to the panel.
Hello, good to be here. Thank you.
Good to have you here. And we've also got joining us today, Peter Gray. Peter Gray is a writer and co-founder with Alkistis of the publishing house Scarlet Imprint. He's the author of the controversial Apocalyptic Witchcraft, a unique interpretation of modern witchcraft, which places it in the context of the Sabbath and in a landscape suffering climate and ecological collapse. In 2015, he published Lucifer, Princeps, a study of the origins of the figure of Lucifer, and in 2019, his collection of essays, The Brazen Vessel. Pre-order for his latest book, from which he reads from in his paper, The Two Antichrists, is now open, with a title expected before the end of March. So Peter, welcome to the panel. So I thought we might start just by locating ourselves in this evening's theme of apocalyptic craft. In your paper, Peter, which has been available on YouTube, you evoke with prophetic urgency an imminent event, which we might call an apocalypse. If you'd like to start by summarizing your understanding of this, I'll then invite Geraldine to give her perspective on the theme. We'll then open the discussion to the floor. So start thinking about your questions and please drop them in the chat or tweet at Ecology Magic or CRASSH Live. So Peter, if it's all right, I'll hand over to you.
Apocalypse has been something which has been part of my thinking for a significant amount of time, particularly because the major themes that we have in Western culture are based on an apocalyptic script, which Christianity in particular has bequeathed to us, the idea that we're heading towards an imminent disaster which will be brought about by the action of God and his angels and lead to the destruction of most of human life on earth, only for us to be replaced in, a new flesh of an unspecified form, and a great renewal will occur when the Christian dead will rise from their graves and Christ will return, etc. I see this as an extremely dangerous form of cultural thinking which we've carried with us and which still underpins a lot of thinking within the way that even late stage capitalism comports itself. So my work has been to do with trying to undo some of these ideas. But at the same time, we're in a period where we're facing existential threats to the human species in a way that we never have before. And I believe that these existential threats are the proper concern of people who are engaged in the project of magic and witchcraft, because magic and witchcraft is, rather than something dislocated into the past, it's very much concerned with where we are in the world, with the non-human others that we're engaged with, and with living lives of meaning. And living lives of meaning requires us to understand the world that we find ourselves part of. So the key issues that I've looked at have been the Extinction Crisis, in that we're going through an extinction level event, and an extinction level event in terms of species, habitats, and non-human others is a magical catastrophe, as well as many of the many of the things that we take for granted in terms of our everyday practice, the things which were previously available to us, are no longer there. We're losing those environments, we're losing those non-human others, we're losing those relationships, and as that web of life disintegrates, then human life will inevitably disintegrate. So those are some of the points that I've been looking at, if that helps open things up.
Thank you so much. So in terms of how craft, I mean, I was just as a quick follow-up, what then does craft mean to you in the context of an image or a conjured or inherited image of the apocalypse?
I think one of the real problems is that when we're talking about witchcraft, we can only talk for ourselves. We can only talk on such a very small local, on a small local basis, because when we talk about apocalypse, we tend to have these kind of like grand visions, and these grand visions of destruction, even though that isn't the original meaning of the term, it's how it's come to be understood. Those grand things miss the granularity of the practice of witchcraft, which is something which happens at a very personal and a very local level. So how one responds to it is very much down to where one finds oneself, which is why I look particularly at the end of Apocalyptic Witchcraft with the ideas of presence, orientation, and imperative, the necessity to find oneself, to orientate oneself by the environment, and to learn from that what it is that we're expected to do, what it is that we as individuals are here to do, and the particular acts that we're meant to pursue. So it's, I'm in a strange position in that I'm a writer, so my primary form of work and a great deal of my magic comes through the way in which I use words. But I'm embedded in furthest West Cornwall, and here we have like the barest remnant survival of a charming tradition, and the practitioners who, for example, worked on the street that I live on would probably not recognize the kind of work that I do. So we're in a very strange position as moderns. We're in a very strange position in relation to witchcraft, and I'm mindful of the tensions that exist in terms of even talking in an academic context about what it is that we do. Firstly, because of the necessity for secrecy in the work, and secondly, because the academic study or discussion of the subject itself is inherently problematic, because it's at such a deeply personal level, and it's so different in terms of the way that it's distributed, that it's very easy to produce quite a distorted view of what practice actually is. Talking to, so for example, it's always going to favour learned practitioners. It's always going to favour those who come from a university level education because of the way that they present. I mean, the nice thing about having Geraldine here and looking at work which is also site specific and dance work, movement work, these other modalities, the production of artworks, the production of fetishes, these things are, I think, a very important way to kind of like break out of just having a text dominant discourse.
Right. Yeah, thank you. And I think actually that takes us to you, Geraldine, and I saw you sort of nodding my head for a few times, and perhaps as someone who does situate themselves very much in the local, in the particular moment, and whose practice is very personal. If you'd like to tell us a little bit more about that and how it speaks to the idea of apocalyptic craft.
Yeah, definitely. I'm aware I'm talking before people get to see my main talk, but I think it's as Peter actually said it, I find it very, very hard to talk about, even though I have academic qualifications, they're art qualifications. So I don't class myself as an academic, and my academic study hasn't been studying the esoterical witchcraft, everything I know is from my practice. Mm-hmm. And I have been practicing on and off since a teenager, but in various ways. And it really was, I think, as we all know, there's been a kind of renaissance in the openness of possibly acceptance around issues of witchcraft and the esoteric, and it's now on full trend also. And that's around the time, and it could have been to do with the fact I was living in Sweden and my age, but that's the time something happened to me when I decided, okay, I can come out of the broom closet, I can actually include. So I class my artwork as magical manifestation in the fact I'm trying to instigate some kind of change according to will or using active imagination. Mm-hmm. So rather than doing artwork about magic or, contextualizing in that way. And I think I just see it as, it's extremely personal. So even though it's easy to be very public and say, okay, the artwork's doing this, and I do these public interactive rights where I invite people, and this is where the site-specific and the land comes in. I mean, thinking about the idea of going back to the apocalyptic, and I'm trying to read what's happening if we are possibly living through a time of revelation and a time of apocalypse, to rather than accepting the biblical and rather than accepting what has been. I mean, we're living in, as Peter and you have stated, these unprecedented, tremendous times and everything is shifting so fast as well. I really think, I'm trying to think almost in a term of post-apocalyptic. So I'm thinking of consequential work. All my work, rather than just being about the intent, I think is consequential. And I'm in a way, I'm not trying to kind of force myself onto others, but when I do these interactive rights, which are site-specific, and a lot of my work it's all about the psyche's relationship to space and land and earth and kin, and then the otherness and the body's relationship. And I also hope to somehow be opening a portal or some kind of gateway or some kind of ability to facilitate people who maybe have not lost their way, but it's all about this kind of reacquaintance. And I really, really feel, I mean, I'm very lucky from a young age. My mum was a gardener, my dad was an animist. I was taught from a very young age not to squash a spider or something, and it's in me. It's always been in me to feel this affiliation with everything around us. But I do realize, and we can, whether we want to take it back to the Industrial Revolution or not, we have this tremendous, we're being divorced from the land. We're so divorced that, as I think mentioned the apocalyptic witchcraft, the land is poisoned. We're not, half the people aren't aware of this, or they don't even feel any kind of responsibility from this because of how divorced we are. So going back to the kind of idea of the local affecting the larger whole, but not being too intimate about my own work I do. When I do the public work, it's specifically interactive. So it's not just performance art. For sometimes, a couple of times it's been just performative, but it's specifically to kind of ground people and like really situate people in that space or in that experience, and to try and through that be consequential, and maybe it will have effect, hopefully some days or weeks or years on. I mean, I did a piece on Salisbury Plain just 2 years ago in the woods and managed to get about 60 people doing an ancestral ritual together to cleanse the land and connect with the plain. And I still have people contacting me, a couple of years later, saying how it's affecting their life and all these weird things are happening. And I can't say whether that has or not, or lay claim to that, but I feel that at least if I kind of open a portal, so I'm always looking to the future and looking to post-apocalyptic or new mythologies. How do we learn from the past but really move forward with our craft? And I really love the fact that, I've just come back from living in Sweden for 11 years, but I love the fact that the Swedish craft in Sweden, craft is power. So that kind of says it all. I'm not sure if I answered the question there, but that's just like a brief introduction to just the fact I really want people through the work to manage to make something happen, to relate to the land, to, you know, to kind of go deeper than maybe they would do normally.
Yeah. And that is in itself an act of opening, and given that, or if magic starts at the personal and must start with the individual in its recognition of the embeddedness and the interconnectedness of everything, it also recognizes that that individual act does not end at the individual. And has those repercussions, and over a long period of time as well, as your own witness attests. Thank you. Yeah. And I think this tension about, you know, the apocalypse as the kind of what could be an annihilation, and craft as the power to remake, to reconnect, a sense of what Donna Haraway would call ongoingness. And that's one of the tensions we're reckoning with and must reckon with now. Yeah. Thank you both. So we've already got some conversation happening in the chat, and I'm just going to see here. We've got some comments about kind of the role of capitalism in sort of suppressing the magical. But let me see if we've got a question for the panelists from MX. Hi, could you speak about the relationship between craft and intuition in practice and in living presently? Okay, so the role of intuition there in practice and living in the present. I don't know who would like to start with an answer to that question.
I can start vaguely, but thanks for the question. I do personally think that's quite a difficult question to answer, because I started a few years ago calling myself an intuitive witch, because I wasn't going by the Gardnerian tradition, and I also wasn't going by possibly all of the, you know, I wasn't using the pagan pantheon in that way. So I just decided, well, I've been seeing and hearing and feeling these things since a young age. That's my intuition. To answer, sorry, what was the question again? Because I can't.
So the relationship between craft and intuition in practice and living presently.
Okay, so in practice, I think it would be better to talk to a psychologist, but I think it is intuitive. I think it's as simple as, for example, when one goes into a forest or a wood or a place where you can feel the spirits of place around you, and it's there, and you can't put a word on this, you can't use that, you know, you kind of falter when you're trying to speak, and it's just there, and you have a feeling, or a bit like when you get this presence of a spirit being with you or being in a certain place. And that's something which I think it's a very individual thing. It's something which you can't explain, and you can't describe it to another person, and you can't tell someone when they're in a right with you, oh, you're going to feel exactly like this, and this is. So when it comes to the craft or using magic, I would say I personally work a lot with my intuition, as I would work with intuition when it comes to my social life and navigating through society. And I think it's a overlooked tool which we need to, the same as dreaming, which we need to actually be honing a lot more. So I don't know if that answered in any way, but maybe.
I wonder whether part of the relationship here is if intuition is something that we think of as being to some extent unconscious, or at least pre-rational or totally non-rational, and craft is something that is more conscious, is something that you do, it's something that you make. And if intuition is what happens before the feeling that then gets translated into the either the magical or the artistic or curatorial practice.
Okay. Yeah,
but I don't know, I was just wondering about
that. They're talking craft as in craft object, not craft as in magic, or both.
I'm not sure.
So
maybe power.
Okay, maybe power, but I would say both actually, because I would say as an artist, as often when you just get this kind of inkling, you're filtering ideas all the time, and the same as how we are filtering all the time, and then you suddenly get an inkling, and this is what I'm making, or this is what I need to produce to as a conduit or to get my message across. So I rely super heavily on, because I'm not a designer or an illustrator, it's not about me seeing something and copying it to make a picture of it. So I would say my work is, it's all about intuition and having a feel for what I think feels right at the time to be making or to be putting out.
Thank you. And Peter, how does the relationship between craft and intuition figure in your practice or in living presently?
Well, I think everyone who's involved with magic and witchcraft is coming from a position where they've been listening to their intuition for a long time, or they're no longer able to just accept the discourse of the rational and the analytic. So these are often deeply or weakly embodied states. So one of the important ways that this is worked with is through the body, and is through the processes of the body. So movement, yoga, breath work, then going into the weakly embodied states, dreaming, psychedelics, all of these other ways, and then integrating those things is the process of craft. So the process of witchcraft is taking that raw material and transforming that into something. Otherwise, you're just lost. Otherwise, you're just lost. If you're not producing, you have to have process, and the challenge is the production of it. A useful creative process out of the raw material of intuition, and accepting that and then transforming that, making it into something new.
And even maybe accepting the kind of the compromise or what's lost in the process of translation.
Sure, there's always something going to be lost in that translation process. Absolutely, but also new things created.
Yeah, right. Thank you. So we've got a question from Scott Brown, I think directly to you, Peter. He says, Peter, you mentioned in your recorded talk that it is time to head for higher ground. Many of us feel this, yet we still seem paralyzed in a mode of waiting for a savior. What advice do you have for galvanizing collectives in responding to our crisis?
Okay, so waiting for a savior, don't. I mean, the simple advice is don't. They tend to be liars, frauds, dangerous hucksters. So, luckily we're in a pretty iconoclastic tradition where we're able to throw out the people who set themselves up as saviors. One of the issues that I've been kind of working through, especially in my work with the two antichrists, is how I describe myself and how I describe my work, and how one can take responsibility in titles without becoming consumed by them. And I think that's one of the problems that besets people in witchcraft and magic. So there's a tension between waiting for a savior, but also I see something perhaps the opposite of that at the moment, which is a tendency to destroy anyone who achieves any level of prominence within any field whatsoever. So I feel that at the moment, probably the major danger is that we have a social media machine which is designed to destroy and pit individuals against each other endlessly. So that fight to the bottom, that constant desire for tearing people down, for insisting that people meet your fucking impossible standards, that's got to end. We've got to stop doing that. In terms of galvanizing collectives to respond to the crisis, I think we have a phenomenal opportunity for people to escape from the more dangerous discourses that are going on, and to form those communities, and to have those discussions in places which are less public than Twitter, for example, or Facebook or any of these other particularly dangerous corporate systems of division and warfare, which people are playing to the detriment of their own dopamine systems. We need to first understand how severe the crises we're facing are. There are a whole range of them. We have an extinction crisis, we have a climate crisis, we have a huge division of wealth crisis occurring, which is going to make everyone in the world extremely poor apart from a handful of billionaires. So there are plenty of reasons to act. And if you're still looking for a reason to act, then you have to say, what is it that's stopping you? What is it that's stopping you? And destroy that and do the work.
Okay. Thank you. So then, yeah, the advice then is to remove to some extent the imagined obstacle.
Remove the imagined obstacle. Yeah. Remove the imagined and do the work. No one's going to do it for you. No one is going to do it for you.
Thank you. So we've got a question from Lizzie. Says, the etymology of apocalypse is an unveiling. What specific things does your apocalyptic craft seek in Unveil, or either to yourself or to others? So I think that's an open question. I wonder, Geraldine, whether you'd like to start on the question of what specific things does your apocalyptic craft seek to unveil, either in yourself or in others?
Now, I would say regarding personal craft, I think I'll focus on the unveiling when it comes to others. Kind of carrying on a little bit from Peter's reply there, is just the fact I actually want to unveil, as if we need to unveil it more, the fact this is happening and we have this, like we've destroyed everything, we've destroyed the planet, we've destroyed, I want to go into an environmentalist polemic, but I really feel that, I don't know, I feel as an artist, it would be very egotistical and selfish of me if I was an artist just working towards my own ego or my own fame or something. And I think when it comes to, before when I said about the artwork being consequential and craft unveiling, just to maybe make people look at themselves, so to unveil themselves, actually. I'm not talking of pointing fingers in that sense, but that would be it, to actually, for them to unveil and meet themselves.
Yeah.
And to really have to have the light shone on where they are and who they are, and to really like the toughness of facing yourself in the mirror. You know, maybe I'm trying to kind of be some kind of catalytic converter for the abyss for everyone, and chucking them in so they actually face up to, and it sounds very don't know if that's possible, but I would say definitely that's the one of the main of unveiling.
Of course, yes, because to unveil is, it wants to remove something that causes, that impedes one's vision, at the same time as making oneself more vulnerable. To be seen without your veil on is absolutely to be more vulnerable and to be more easily read. Yeah.
And the only obstacle, well, it's easy to say because it takes a while to overcome it, but the obstacle is fear, and the obstacle is fear, and this sense we all seem to have that it's not our responsibility, similar to the savior or the state or someone else looking after you. You know, we've been conditioned for so long that it's always someone else's problem, or it's diminished responsibility. And I think it's about maybe unveiling the fact you actually there is no authority but yourself in the end, and you have the power to face that and go forward somehow.
Yeah, and actually now I think about it, if the apocalypse is itself an unveiling, then it is, as you say, Peter, it is the ultimate reckoning with what we have done without the veil on. what we are seeing now and the devastation that we're living in is in itself an unveiling of us more than anything else, perhaps. Peter, did you have any thoughts on the relationship between unveiling and practice and the apocalypse?
It's certainly something that Alcestis has talked about a lot. So I'll try not to tread on her toes with that because of the ideas around the unveiling and the bride. And for us, ideas around Babylon and ideas around sex and sexuality, but that would be taking us off into a bit of a wilder kind of sexual mysticism, and I won't do that right now. But there are ideas around sex and mysticism here which are very, very important. But we'll go off sideways if you follow that.
Okay. So Michael E. has a follow-up to Lizzie's question on unveiling. Could you speak to the ways the dynamic of unveiling may be playing out alongside art interweaving in our lives with the destruction we're witnessing? Perhaps I jumped the gun there earlier by sort of setting the unveiling in the context of devastation that we're living in. But there's the word here, interweaving, which we haven't had yet, as a word that also relates to the making of a veil. So perhaps there's a connection there. Anyway, so sorry, could you speak to the ways the dynamic of unveiling may be playing out alongside or interweaving in our lives with the destruction we're witnessing? Is there anything further we might add there? It might be something that we've covered, actually.
Yeah, I think it's it feels like we've covered this, but it's definitely, I think even through the internet, even though I have this kind of love-hate, and I know Peter talked earlier of systems of division, and I find it very, very interesting when we're talking about probably the personal unveiling which is happening, this kind of like mass weird transgression which we have, where the lid is open and everyone wants to tell everyone about their private lives, and in a way which would have been just not thought of like 20 years ago or 10 years ago. I think really is a kind of like personal psychological, I want to use the word chaotic, but it's definitely a symptom of reaction of what's going on around us. And it is like, and I think the egoism I see all around, where it's suddenly turning into, I want to do my private life online or talk about everything, and it's a way, it's almost like a way of like trying to pull back control of lives, because they can't control, we can't control Trump or anything else happening around us. People very much, and I know a lot of academics have also talked about this is why we have the re-emergence of spirituality and witchcraft. I'm sure Dawkins might say this, that it's just about us trying to keep our corner and have power. But then that's not necessarily a bad thing. The internet blogging aside, if we can maybe hone that in a different way, it's really made people, it's taken the veil off and made people realize what they can control is what they put out. But I really see this as it's a result and a symptom of everything going wrong. The world catastrophe has just kind of lifted this.
So recognizing also that the veil might be there to protect something sacred and something private.
Definitely. And I'm still very much into the whole, the personal is political, the private is political, and there's nothing wrong with sharing that, but I think you have to be very careful who it's shared with or where it's shared as well. And I'm quite interested to see where we'll be landing in maybe 10 years' time, looking back on everything which has exploded online, and if there's going to be
thank you. Okay, so moving on from veiling and unveiling, we've got a question from Sarah. This is a two-part question, and mainly just out of curiosity. I also work with the arts, and do you find people overlook the witchcraft intuition element or write it off just as a creative affectation? Secondly, how did you find the community feeling or social reaction towards witchcraft in Sweden then? Anywhere else in terms of understanding the controversy? So I think the first part applies to both of you, Geraldine and Peter. The question about how far people overlook the witchcraft intuition element and write it off as a creative affectation. And then the second is asking you, Geraldine, specifically, what was it like in Sweden? Peter, perhaps you'd like to start us off.
I see quite the opposite. I see many people in the arts trying to use the idea of witchcraft or themes around witchcraft in order to prop up pretty fucking lackluster work. So probably in the last 5 to 10 years, I've seen a whole range of contemporary artists producing pretty appalling work, whilst trying to draw on the fact that there has been an upswing in interest in witchcraft. So I don't feel that the arts are rejecting those things. I think the problem is that they don't quite know how to approach them in a constructive way. That would be my brief comment on that.
Yeah, I suppose there's always a risk here that these things get turned into they get brandified, and
commodification is something that our culture does extremely well, and people have been trained, and young artists have been trained to commodify themselves in ways that I find pretty distasteful. But this is also something that witchcraft practitioners do to themselves. You know, I run a publishing company. I'm a writer. I've got blood on my hands with this as well. But there are concerns that I see in the practitioner community with the way in which witchcraft is commodified by people who aren't necessarily engaged in the practice. But yeah, art, witchcraft, like you can't separate the two, and I think we're seeing those walls coming down again, and that can only be a good thing in many ways.
Thank you, Geraldine.
Picking up on that, and Peter touched upon this as well. This I don't want to be too critical as a artist, but I am lucky enough to be coming from a slightly different perspective, because I'm in my 40s and I've taken a while to develop my work, and I hope I'm not wagon jumping in that sense. But there are two aspects which I think I kind of fear as a artist as well, because it is a trend. Then soon it will become unfashionable, as all fashions do and all trends. So then it will be that if you are genuinely working with this, or working with artwork as a manifestation, or using art as a magical tool, which I do, then there's just and it's also the fact it's being kind of commodified to the extent it's similar to those of us who maybe grew up listening to underground music or post-punk or something, and we all screamed when H&M had the punk t-shirts. It's been the thing is, if something is a threat and then it gets commodified and accepted into the mainstream, not that I'm saying we are a threat, but then as soon as it becomes accepted into the mainstream, it's almost a way of the mainstream to dilute and divide and to make out that it's just pop, or it's so a lot of the esoteric artwork I'm seeing is literally people doing parodies. And that's a big thing in contemporary art anyway, irony and parody all the time. It's like a kind of contemporary pop art, which has been happening the past 5 or 10 years, which I've seen all over. And and they have these amazing blurbs, because you're taught this art speak, but at the end of the day, it's kind of interesting, because I wonder if they would be doing the same kind of parody about Christianity in that way, or any other religion, and just doing these big exhibitions. And it's also a way for people, even though witchcraft is incredibly sexy, it's a way for people to make themselves seem a little bit edgy and interesting. And, I'm doing something spooky, I'm doing the occult for this year's project. So I'm actually quite cynical about I don't want to be too cynical, because on the other hand, I'm very, very glad it's accepting, and I'm glad, I'm currently doing my MFA at Goldsmiths, and they're a very open-minded institution anyway, but I'm very glad, that they they're accepting to the kind of work I do, but I always emphasize with my work that I am questioning consensus reality.
Right.
So I'm sorry, what was the other one?
About in Sweden, whether that felt like a different
Actually,
work.
I found Sweden, which is probably why I came back from Sweden with the confidence to be more open about this. I found Sweden extremely accepting. I mean, I remember writing an essay for the art school I was at in 2006, and when I was talking about transgression and ritual, and I think I was talking about dreams and archetypes, and one of my tutors actually said to me, quote, "Drop young, it's hocus pocus and unfashionable." And then a couple of years later, I moved to Sweden, and all around me, people were making work inspired, I guess, with the traditional people like Hilma Klint. You know, there was work, everything from performance art to illustration was dabbling in esoteric themes. It was amazing. And so I would say that Sweden is very accepting in the fact that, whether it's a cliche or not, but Swedes have kept this relationship to nature in the way that I feel some Brits have, but some haven't, but Swedes have this still embedded. You know, they have something called the Skog School, the forest school, at a young age in school, where they're taught to go out into the forest and learn which berries are poisonous, which ones to eat, learn how to respect nature. So it's embedded, and they kind of seem to have it alongside the Lutheranism and the other traditions.
Yeah, I suppose sometimes I wonder myself, I will take I'm abusing my privilege as the chair here, but how far, talking about the kind of the sort of the parodic territory that contemporary artists might enter into when sort of assuming an occult practice, how far even that parody is unwitting, how far it's self-conscious, because of course that is, parody is something that art does very well and should do, but the unwittingness of it is a particularly interesting element to me anyway. But okay, so Edward Parker's got a question. Hello, I suppose that we can all be seen to have a personal apocalypse in the inevitable experience of our death. With regards to spirituality, and especially the craft, do you believe that the human soul survives that? And if the apocalypse is not so much a mass destruction, can entities have connections with tangible objects, such as their physical earthly remains, or the surroundings in which they dwelt, which have been left behind after their own physical destruction? So a question there about how far death is the end, I suppose. Yeah.
Sure.
I don't know if this is a too personal topic, perhaps, to reflect on.
No, I can do that. That's not a problem.
Okay.
So yes, the inevitable experience of our own deaths is one of the critical crises that we need to all go through as magical practitioners. So we often see the Eastern version with death posture. So no one who has a yoga practice will end a class with what is essentially a corpse posture meditation. In witchcraft, traditional witchcraft, we have these kind of things. So I have skulls and bones on my altar, not because I'm an edgelord, but because I need to be in constant relationship to both my own deaths and the deaths of those who've come before me. And I think it's an important crisis that people need to go through. So the process of confronting one's personal apocalypse, this is a daily thing, die daily. You need to engage in these meditative processes. So the question is, do I believe that the human soul survives death? And again, the correct question or the correct approach would be, you need to have experiences which prove to yourself beyond doubt that your soul survives beyond death. And if you haven't had those experiences, then you need to seek them out. Mm-hmm. And how you do that is entirely up to you. But an abstract question, does the human soul survive death, is of no use at all to you. You need to have the experience. You need to provoke the experience, and you need to go there and do that. And then we can get on to the other things, like do these things, do entities have connection with objects left on Earth, physical remains? Yes, they do. They clearly do. And these are things that you need to move from an intellectual sphere into a personal experiential sphere. That would be my advice to Edward. And best of luck with it.
Yeah. Okay. And Geraldine, just to unmute yourself there.
I was just going to follow on just briefly, because I totally agree with Peter's answer, that if we view the fact we're constantly going through change, we're constantly going through life, death, and rebirth, I think, yeah, people do have to be experiencing those situations for themselves. It's a personal, I don't think anyone would believe you, even if one could claim, yes, we know the soul survives after death, until people have been working with certain practices and doing certain things which kind of would really change their personal thinking around this. Then it's a question which feels a bit like, yeah, it's almost a bit like it would go down to the fact against the spirits or something like this. But I just want to say very quickly, I do think something which all the magical practitioners I know do is we respect death so much. And I do think I actually I have a series of work I started on quite recently around death rites, because I do something I feel alongside our connection to nature that we've just lost in Western society, is our connection to death and our respect for death and our respect for the dead and our connection to, and I think that's why a lot of magical practitioners have bones and are working with this as well. I work with bones in my artwork and we have to always be aware of our own mortality. And I think it's just always brushed under the carpet here, always. I mean, and people aren't taking it seriously enough or respecting it enough as a passage in life.
Yeah. So the answer is yes.
Yes.
Go find it. Yeah. But on the topic of brushing things under the carpet, we've got a question from Renee asking about the word normal and the Western cultural conversation around the word normal, especially in the last 14 months. So Renee says, I personally often find the word is used to bulldoze over utopian dreaming or building or growing to something better. That this is fearful protection of an impractical idea of normal, which everyone has a different take on, is us actively digging our own grave with the word normal on the tombstone. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. So if perhaps you have your own ideas of what normal is instrumentalized to do, or what it's recruited to abolish or suppress.
Well, it's very binary, isn't it? Because if you have normal, you have abnormal. You have one and you have the other. So, yeah, it's. I think it's just about us. We're going through a time when we're learning. We just need to kind of maybe shed those skins of the old binary way of thinking and just find new words, even new terms, new ways of thinking, actually, or change the Oxford definition of normal.
Yeah, because it's either sort of dismissive or alienating, isn't it? Yeah,
definitely.
Or sort of an unthinking word. I wonder, Peter, whether you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I'm wondering whether Renee is thinking particularly in terms of the pandemic, in terms of the way that normal has been used as a wish that we can move from these extraordinary conditions into the normal again, and that there will be a return to safety. and that there's an attempt to say that we will move to a state of safety. And I think that's an extremely dangerous discourse. I don't think that there is a normal to return to, because I don't think that there was a normal before then. I think that's an artificial idea. I think we're in one of the most rapidly moving periods of human history that mankind has ever seen, and in the next decades we're going to see that accelerate at an increasing pace, particularly with AI coming on stream, with technological innovation, and with the way in which the world's going to change. So my concern with normal is that it's a lie being used to pacify people, and to also inoculate them from what is a period of radical and ongoing change, and a series of conditions which have been imposed upon us, which the state is unlikely to remove, in the same way that we saw with the analysis, for example, of disaster capitalism, and the replacement of disaster capitalism with surveillance capitalism. And I think that the new normal that we will be emerging into will be a world which is in danger of the ideas that are being put forward by Klaus Schwab and the ideas of the Great Reset. And I think we're entering into an extremely abnormal future.
Yeah, I mean, the phrase "new normal" itself is kind of a contradiction in terms, an absurd one, I think, often. So we've got a question from Mary Grace Allardyce. Can you speak to the ritual of creativity, which is for me where magic and art converge, as a portal through the apocalypse? Does the new earth and new heaven have two options? The technical, logical, dystopic, or the ecological, as you said, Peter, with the accelerationist versus the ecological in your paper, I think. The daring of creativity to make, in the face of devastation, extinction. Is our creativity of craft the building of the new heaven earth, for which we may or may not be present as humans in the midst of devise? I think this, speaks precisely to the topic of the talk,
Sure. Well, the idea that I've been really kind of battling with for some time, because people have mistakenly assumed that I'm an anarcho-primitivist because I have some quite hardline ecological views, but at the same time I'm a Promethean, and I'm from a Promethean tradition. I am a Luciferian in technical terms. So one of the things that I've been looking at, particularly into Antichrists, is rather than seeing ecology and the highest point of industrial civilization, which is becoming a multiplanetary species, as being things which are in radical tension, is there a way in which we can see these ideas as like functioning as a ball and chain? So the thought experiment that I've been involved in is the conception that for life itself to survive, which is my aim is the survival of life above all things. For life to survive, we need to become multiplanetary. There's no argument about that. At some stage, the planet will be destroyed, whichever catastrophe you want to pick. But in order for us to become multiplanetary, we need to increase the size of the aperture. And the only way to increase the size of the aperture, which is the time it requires for us to reach the level of technological brilliance to establish our first off-planet colony, we need to engage in radical habitat restoration, and we need to engage in radical ecology. So my thought at the moment is trying to not divorce these two things, but to create a ball and chain effect where both radical ecology and space exploration are part of the same process, rather than being seen as two processes that are in a terrible conflict.
Okay, so these two things can be they can serve each other rather than be...
I think that they can serve each other, because I think we're going to get both of them. So pragmatically, that's what we have. Those are the pieces on the board. And I'm only ever interested in wargaming with the pieces that are on the board. Utopias don't help us.
Yeah, thank you, Geraldine. And you what are your views on the daring of creativity? It's a very Promethean kind of tenet to that question, actually, in the face of devastation.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think it's, as Peter said, we're playing with what's on the board. I think creativity, well, art in itself can give a portal in a way which maybe other forces can't. If science, alongside the technologies and the kind of radical ecological movements, I still think you need art as being the tool to actually open people's eyes and make people think. And as much as I think the written word is often more powerful, you have to actually get people to be reading that written word, where I think art has this kind of like fluidity where it can actually come into someone's life in a different way. And I really see art as being the being used as the portal between and what Peter was saying, actually, what he was saying about multiplanetary just made me think about the fact that this, just if anyone's read the very famous Le Guin book, The Word for World is Forest. I don't know if people are aware of this book. And so what we don't want happening is for that to happen, where we've destroyed Earth and then we colonize another planet and destroy that. So I think there needs some kind of radical education, radical socialization, and a rethinking of kin and our planet. And I'm not sure which country, I could be getting this wrong. I think, isn't it New Zealand, where very recently, can someone help me on this, the Prime Minister decided to pass a law regarding the fact that all species were classed as equal or something like this.
Oh, I don't know this one myself.
We're slowly going. There was some kind of law passed to recognise all species as sentient beings.
Okay, yeah, of course.
So, but yeah, we definitely need to be having this. I think the combination between the technology, radical ecology, but multiplanetary, and I think art is. I'm obviously biased, but the tool to help that.
So at the point at which we go off world, we need to stop looking at planets as just expendable resources, as we've done with our own for a while now.
Yeah.
So there was a question here, and I think, Geraldine, you've spoken to this already, but from Elliot Dale, asking about how we fight the new normal in practice and what kind of praxis is needed. I think they're particularly concerned with the greenwashing movement and how we provide a counter-narrative based more around rewilding and symbiosis with the natural world through this radical presence and revealing, what sort of creative acts, or what I think maybe a sort of a precise answer is asked for here, what sort of creative acts of art and performances and installation can inspire strike back? How do we fight the new normal?
Yeah, I guess I can just give one example of a creative act, because I know people haven't seen my talk yet, but one example is I've been working with I did a piece as part of a festival of walking and sound the other year, where I was taking recordings from sacred spaces and then inviting people into another sacred space with me within the city. So trying to get people to find spaces within the city and then doing some deep listening. So as well as any other kind of interactive act, I think it's just a case of inviting. I think if people are invited, everyone has this kind of fear, but I think if you instigate something and invite people, we all have this amazing curiosity, and we have this magical curiosity which we're born with. And then society kind of tells us this isn't normal, it's not normal to believe in this or hear this or see this, and we slowly learn to normalize ourselves and to have this. But I think creative acts in any way can just be there to invite people, and it's almost like the onus is on the artist. They can be just seen as the slightly insane one who's doing this, and we just went along because it was artwork or something. So that's where it can be
That's often the starting place for someone's consciousness shifting. As I say, well, I was just curious about this, but then actually it had this quite profound effect on me. And I think, yeah, I love that idea of that, just to begin by kind of rekindling, awakening curiosity through an act of invitation, which is also an act of generosity. Is, yes, sounds right to me. Absolutely. Yeah. So wow, we've got a lot of messages, and unfortunately I don't think we're going to be able to get through them all, but we've got one from Lisa Jane Davis, who's asking about sacred plants for healing. Having recently read a book called Consciousness Medicine, the author encouraged connecting to local traditions and learning about traditional medicines and the culture tied to the land we live on. Here in the States, it is difficult, with history having largely been distorted, obliterated in the name of progress, especially in cities born out of genocide of Indigenous people and shaped by industry, like this person's hometown of Detroit, Michigan. It's part of the apocalypse, but how can one find magical footing in such a place? How do we start reconnecting in an animist way where the soil itself is infused with toxic metals, pesticides, and concrete that has coated the land? So that's a lovely question, and I think it's for both of you.
Well, let me answer to that. I live in West Cornwall, which is like one of the most incredible landscapes you could possibly imagine, and it's an industrial wasteland. The entire place has been ravaged by mining, by fishing, by the most awful things you could think. The worst injustices you could do to a land have been done to this place, and this is the same across England. Everywhere I've lived, you scratch the surface of what appears to be an idyllic landscape, and you discover that it's built upon extractive, destroying industry, and that those poisons are still in the land and like flowing out into the sea. I mean, this is what we all live with, Americans, and I see Americans doing this all the time. I'm not like attacking this person. I'd just like to kind of wake them up a little bit. America, you have some incredible work to do. You have this land which you are in. Get over your guilt. Get over your guilt and be present and be aware of the plants and the animals and the things which are around you, and move into relationship with them. Move into relationship with them. Stop playing the guilt game. The guilt game is doing you no good at all. Like, you are surrounded by these plants. They're growing out of the concrete around you. That's where you begin. Begin where you are. Don't look for like an idealized landscape, because you will not find one on this planet. Don't look for a place that isn't soaked in the blood of oppressed people. You will not find one. You won't find one. Look at your hands, accept the blood on them, and get on with the work. That's my I hope generous response to that. You've got America, you have so much potential. Just stop looking to the past and do the work now.
Yeah, and to just carry on from this, exactly as Peter was saying, I mean, some of the medicine plants I was using for myself when I was living in Sweden were just things I found. I had an art studio on one of the most polluted pieces of land in Stockholm, because that's where artists get put, on the old industrial areas. And yet all around me was growing beautiful mugwort and St. John's wort and all of the Swedish natural flowers, because they had come back. So, you don't have to be looking for acres and acres of something. Just utilize what you have. I'm now back in a big city, I'm back in London, and I'm surrounded by, and I'm constantly on my walks during this heavy lockdown, looking along the waste ground and the hedgerows and noting, this is coming up, and I've been slowly collecting for my own. It's your own kind of psychogeographic herb garden, and it's possible everywhere. Probably why I'm so personally linked to the whole psychogeographic thing is I've been very nomadic throughout my life. I've lived in 3 different countries, I've moved around a lot, and the one thing I always did from a very young age was go out walking and feel the spirit of the place and find, and it is possible. And if you do have this feeling about the fact it is so poisoned, this has happened, then maybe do some magical work around this, do some cleansing work, cleanse the land, cleanse where you are, cleanse yourself. Try to relate to the people living there before, try to do ancestral work. If you're, see how far your ancestors go back in the USA, depending if you were you have North American or South American ancestors or come from Europe. Work with this, work with what you have, and then, as Peter said, move forward. It's not about looking back. We haven't got time to be looking back and always crying over the history. And I don't mean that in an awful white, privileged way. I mean, we need to forge the post-colonial and the forward. And we need to be moving as fast as everything else is moving. So,
yeah. So I suppose I think we're going to kind of come to an end here, whilst looking forward, whilst also trying to, or accepting the necessity of working with the present and not getting too caught in what can feel, like the real paralyzing grip of the past. So there's been a few questions about the supposed antithesis between deep ecology and what's sometimes referred to as the tech fix. So if we just return at the end here between resolving that contradiction, as you, Peter, have suggested we do. And we've got a final question from Simone asking about acknowledging your remarks on the need to couple radical ecology with a multi-planetary pragmatics, and the novelist Kim Stanley Robinson, who writes about sort of sci-fi and working in the future, off planet and on this planet, in a very changed planet. So Simone wants to know whether either of you have read and engaged with Robinson's work at all in your thinking.
Alas not, but I made a note because one of the great things about this is always being introduced to new thoughts and ideas. As you can see behind me, like books are a bit of a problem around these parts. So I'll chase that up. I've been doing a lot of looking at science fiction because one of the things that I came across is the idea that we've stopped dreaming about the future in the way that we used to. So I've been looking at one of the things that went really wrong with the Babylon working of Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. And one of the things that happened with the death of Jack and with the ascension of Scientology is that people in magic and witchcraft who previously had been on the cutting edge of these ideas suddenly just fell away from it altogether. And we've seen that as well with what I've critiqued before is the return to ideas of a tradition when those traditions themselves are entirely invented and seem to be a way to avoiding our responsibility in the future. So let me acknowledge that the position that I'm proposing at the moment is a complicated and a nuanced one. It's very difficult for us to think about the highest level of industrial technology existing at the same time as the solutions of radical ecology. But what I'm arguing is that we need to make the creative link to join those things together, because we're going to get them. It doesn't matter what your personal moral take on this is. We are going to Mars. Now, would you like us to go to Mars and take all life with us? And would you like us to go to Mars because we've made radical ecology what that is contingent upon? And my position is that we have to do this, because otherwise we will be run over by history. We will be left behind. So I'm doing something which is going to annoy some ecologists, and I'm glad that there are radical ecologists. I'm glad that there are anarcho-primitivists. I'm glad that there are people who will throw my copy of Apocalyptic Witchcraft off the room and go, oh my God, Peter Gray's become an accelerationist, because these are difficult, complex ideas. And I think that magic and witchcraft is a place where we should be able to have those difficult and complex ideas without necessarily engaging in ad hominem attacks on one another, because we're in a radical age, and in a radical age, we need radical solutions.
Yeah, and to be able to hold seemingly contradicting things in suspension is part of what it means to be creative.
Yeah.
Geraldine, I wonder if you have any sort of final thoughts on that before I thank you both.
Definitely, and actually going to what Peter said about my thoughts on that are still going back to the fact one of the main reasons I believe that we have to re-educate and accelerate people's understanding of kin and earth is that if this is our path and we are repopulating other planets in the future, then we don't want, like Le Guin, we don't want this to happen. And maybe, you know, we have to get that level of respect happening here in order to go forward. I would say that's a very brief answer to that.
Thank you
as well.
Okay, well, I think we've planned it all out. Just kidding. So I think that's probably all we've got time for today. And I'm sorry to those whose questions I haven't been able to ask to the speakers. But now it remains for me to just thank you both, Geraldine and Peter, for such a productive, such a good discussion, at least in my view. And to thank the listeners and those who've asked questions for helping to make what has happened happen. So thank you very much. So details of future seminars and events can be found at crash.cam.ac.uk. That's CRASSH.cam.ac.uk. And the Magic and Ecology website, magicandecology.crash.cam.ac.uk. You can also follow us on Twitter at Ecology Magic. Thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks so much.